Sekeres and Price for Wednesday, August the 14th, alongside Jeff Paterson, who's in for the vacation. Matt Sekeres. I'm Blake Price. We're at the Nation Network studio built by Arbor Lee at the Wall Center in downtown Vancouver. It's the heart of downtown Vancouver as well. Book your stay at the Wall. Start thinking about your fall and winter parties, too. Yeah, not too far away. 604-331-1000. We're live on YouTube, most of your socials at 11:30. It's every day in the hockey season, 2 to 3 days a week in the summertime. Make sure you give us a follow and never miss a beat. And a big welcome to Jeff, as I mentioned. Thanks for doing this all week long. Who would have thought we'd actually have news to talk about?
Dog days? Forget about it.
A manna from heaven. Manna from heaven, which leads us into our poll question today. Given the requirement of a team's own draft picks and cap space, will this Canucks management group ever make an offer sheet? In the wake of the Oilers and Blues embroiled in this showdown, cast your vote, yes or no. Where are you going right now? Can you see this happening?
This management group, I think, is the important part here. Who knows how long they're in charge, but the way things are going, I think they're going to have a pretty long leash here. But this is a group that's been operating up against the cap for the longest time. So the idea of making some sort of splash to bring in a pricey piece, I'm not sure. And then the other part, obviously, is having the draft capital necessary. And right now, the Canucks, the next bunch of years, don't have third rounders. I think 2 years out, they don't have a second rounder. Now, we saw with St. Louis Blues, there are ways of going about recouping the picks necessary to get into the offer sheet game, but I voted no. I voted no just because I think this management group wants to go about business its own way, assemble the pieces necessary to put together a contender. Now, do I think that this management group wouldn't entertain the idea if it was in a position? Like, I think they're shrewd enough that if the opportunity presented itself, sure, I just think they're going to be hamstrung by the way they operate up against the cap.
I think you've nailed it. This management group is unorthodox enough. Yes, do they have the quote-unquote hockey men around? Yes, they do. Jim Rutherford certainly has those qualifications, but they've got enough new school thinkers as well that I think if they had everything in tow, they would absolutely be of the mind to consider it. But I mean, so often this management group, minus Cami Granato and others, I suppose, they've had the reputation, Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford will say that, of trading away draft picks, making those necessary moves in order to get better throughout the season and at the trade deadline, etc. That it's going to be tough to have the capacity. Now, I'll say this. The requirements are not too grave here. The Broberg's a dollar under, in fact, that threshold for just the second round pick. The next threshold after that is a first and a third. That gets complicated. Keeping track of your first and your thirds. And then again, it has to be yours. Can't be something you've traded for. Can't be Chicago's third and your first. It has to be your own. That's tougher to keep track of. Just making sure, do you have a second round pick coming up here in the next draft? I mean, which the Canucks do, incidentally. So, they had that bullet in their chamber. That one's a little bit easier to handle. Those are a little less likely to be victorious because they're lower money. But when you've bundled them together, as the St. Louis Blues have, that's where there's some genius in Doug Armstrong's ways here, in that any one of these contracts is not a crazy one to match. He's got to theoretically match both to keep both of his players. And that's why I think most people are of the mind that only one of these two gets saved as an Edmonton Oiler. We'll see. They've got 7 days to match. But cast your vote on the poll question on all of our socials. Let us know what you think. And we'll have the results for you coming up on the next show as well. Again, given the requirement of a team's own draft picks and cap space, will this Canucks management group ever make an offer sheet? And I think as you go back and look at it here, Jeff, there's been signings over the last 5-6 weeks. Might there have been somebody on the menu that isn't on the menu now that you could have forced somebody's hands when the Canucks did have some cap space? I'm talking.
Well, look, this is really solid work by the St. Louis Blues to box the Oilers in. If they had done this earlier in the summer, the Oilers might have had some options to sort of squirm their way out of it when guys like Adam Boquist and Oliver Shillington were out there as unrestricted free agents that, they don't want to lose Broberg, but there were plan Bs available.
Right.
The Blues waited deep into the summer. Those other guys find hockey homes elsewhere. And so now the Oilers' hands are tied. And again, I mean, the way that this was orchestrated and executed, 2-year deals, knowing full well that the Oilers' bigger picture is on Leon Draisaitl and Evan Bouchard, who both need new contracts after this season. So by making these 2-year offers, it makes it that much more difficult for the Oilers to fit these players into their salary structure in the here and now, but also having impacts moving forward. So, look, it's great for us in this business. It gives us a ton to talk about. I can imagine in Edmonton, you can feel the heat from this distance, middle of summer. And I think the Oilers were, and look, the Oilers aren't alone in this. I think you get deep into the summer, most teams, when they have restricted free agents who don't have any leverage, the hockey team just thinks, we're going to sit tight and we're going to force them to take our deal. Like young guys, they want to play. They don't want to miss training camp. They want a deal in place. They want some certainty. And I think the Oilers kind of felt that was the way that they were going to go with Broberg and Holloway here. And the St. Louis Blues said, not so fast. We got some other ideas here and we're going to pounce. And so going to be fascinating to see where it goes. And look, everything on a show like this one tracks back to the Vancouver Canucks, but I think it's got some implications for the Canucks. Not only are they measuring themselves against the Edmonton Oilers, and we saw the epic 7-game battle in the playoffs, but look, the Canucks getting Vincent Desharnais. Again, if the Oilers had more defensive depth, losing Broberg wouldn't be ideal, but it might not be as impactful as Desharnais gone. It looks like Broberg of the two is probably the guy that's going to end up shifting places here.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're the Edmonton Oilers, and there were already questions about a defensive core that has Darnell Nurse making $9.25, Cody Ceci, Matthias Ekholm's been terrific, but he's getting on in years here. They went out and they signed Josh Brown as a low-value free agent, but I don't know if you want him in your lineup every single night. Like, I think he was signed as a depth guy. They've got Stetch hanging around, but is Troy Stetcher an everyday player? He's 30 now, and then so there is a hit to this Oilers team if they lose Broberg, and obviously the Canucks feel that they're going to be there neck and neck with the Edmonton Oilers. Beat them in the regular season, didn't get past them in the playoffs, but anything that happens that can make the Oilers weaker has to be seen to some degree as good news on this side of the Rockies.
If you're curious, hey, is there anybody else? First of all, the Canucks don't have a ton of cap space anyway, so they're unlikely to be able to pull off an offer sheet anyway. They do have their second round pick, so they could do a $4.5 million offer sheet to somebody. 5 of the top 7 RFAs to me are no-brainers. They get matched immediately. And in a lot of cases, the players won't sign them because maybe they're anticipating getting more money than $4.5 million already, i.e. a Lucas Raymond. Lucas Raymond, Seth Jarvis, Thomas Harley, Moritz Seider, and Matty Beniers, immediate match from all of their respective teams. A little bit more curious for Cole Perfetti and Dawson Mercer, who are launching, like they're doing fine, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say they're lagging necessarily, but they're just not quite the apples of the eye of the previous group of players. They probably get matched, and both of those teams, wouldn't you know it, have pretty much just about that amount of money of cap space available. It's like a bit of an insurance plan just in case.
The old buffer.
Yeah. So they can match the Jets and the Devils, so they probably would in the case of Perfetti and Mercer. But it would be interesting if you were a team that had cap space and wanted to do it just as a lark. Then you get into the teams that you really make squirm. And I don't even know if the Leafs do squirm about Nick Robertson anymore. 27 points in 56 games, and he's undersized. I mean, it's
Didn't he want out?
Yeah,
as well?
yeah.
So,
I think there are talks that he wants out, so that might be overpayment. And then you're into the Phil Tomasinos, Peyton Krebs, Kyler Yamamoto's, and you don't want to pay those guys $4.5 million. So, yeah, I mean, that season is pretty much past. We're down to players that are going to get theirs, and they're going to get theirs from their own respective teams. We'll dive back into this in just a little bit because there's lots more to get into on these offer sheets from the Blues to the Oilers. Again, Philip Broberg, Dylan Holloway, $4.5 million and change for Philip Broberg and $2.2 million for Dylan Holloway and change. Yeah. So decisions to be made. 7 days for the Edmonton Oilers to come to a decision. We'll come back to that story in just a little bit, but right now it's our top story presented by Yellow Dog Brewing and Yellow Dog Spirits, Neighborhood Brewing, and Foolish Wines. Nathan Rourke is signed, sealed, and delivered to the BC Lions. He is back in the Canadian Football League. Media availability is happening right after this live show ends, so perhaps a tad more color is added after that, but he's in playing shape. Been in all these NFL camps. He knows the offense. He has to be starting this weekend versus Winnipeg, a game that was already going to be a well-attended one. Upper Bowl's already open. It just got another boost. And this team has lost 3 games in a row. They've already released Jake Dolegala. Chase Bryce is around. I think that's a pretty easy decision. I know Chase Bryce just went 4 for 4. No, I don't think that's going to use.
He's not leaping to the top of the depth chart.
No.
And the fact that they have released Dolegala outright, to me, tells you, like, that's paving the way that Vernon Adams still isn't. Like, there was talk about maybe rushing him back before the Nathan Rourke news came down. Remember, the Lions have lost 3 in a row, and I was thinking to myself, well, first of all, I was thrilled. Like, I'm thrilled for the Lions. I'm thrilled for Lions fans. I'm thrilled for the CFL. I was thrilled, though, to see Nathan Rourke, having been away from this league for a couple of years, like, still moving the needle in a big way. Like, the response of social, like, people were into it, and that's great for the BC Lions. And again, massive salute to Amar Doman for making these things happen. It does beg the question, though, and we talked about this on Monday's show. Lions have lost 3 in a row. They were 5-1 at one point. If they were 8-1, and Vernon Adams was just sailing along as the presumptive MOP in the Canadian Football League this year, the Lions make this move. Does Nathan Rourke feel, would he feel welcome coming in if the Lions, and again, totally hypothetical, I get that. But if everything was going smoothly and Nathan and Vernon Adams Jr. was running this show and the Lions were running away with the West, I'm not sure that the need was there, that the impetus would have been there, but it sort of felt like a perfect storm. VA's injured. Lions have lost 3 in a row.
Yeah.
The brand taking on a little bit of water here in a Grey Cup year. And here is Nathan Rourke, who can't get the shot that he's looking for south of the line. It all just lined up perfectly. And, it was all hypothetical on Monday when we sat in here and did this. It's reality now. He is back in the fold. He's back in the Lions' den. And yeah, the expectation is he's going to be behind center to start on Sunday at home against Winnipeg.
You can make the argument the top 2 quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League are on the same team, the BC Lions. Yes, the Canadian Football League does have a salary cap. There is no Puckpedia for the CFL to keep track of. The truth of the matter is, folks, I'm not going to purport to know exactly where that cap status is with the 2 of them on this roster, because goodness knows they're both going to be in the top handful of cap hits, you'd think, in the Canadian Football League. Now, it's a prorated deal for Rourke for this year. Makes it a little bit more palatable, obviously. And you do have the option of getting Adams off of the cap with the 6-game injured list. I'll leave that to them. And I'll leave the smirking about how well the CFL salary cap is policed. I don't know how well. It's not quite like the National Hockey League where it is buttoned down. At least that's not my understanding. I'm prepared to be corrected on that. But let's let them deal with that. We'll deal with the fun of it all, of the fact that this team is back to getting exciting again. And again, the Vernon Adams edition of this team is just fine. But with him dinged up, with the Grey Cup happening here in Vancouver, and with this receiving core the way it is, and with the defense the way they're playing, which is to say not that great lately, scoring points is going to be ultra critical for this team. And Nathan Rourke all of a sudden gives you the option to score points. And remember, he can also run with the ball pretty well.
I was watching some highlights of him yesterday after the news came down, and I've got memories stored away in my head, but yeah, his playmaking ability is scrambling. Guy threw 25 touchdown passes in 10 games in 2022 before he got injured. Twice threw for close to 500 yards in a game. Like, airdrop that in to this mix, and you can't make any promises, and it may take him a little time to, he has not seen a lot of live game action. It's been fits and starts for him, 4 different places in the National Football League. So there may be a little bit of a readjustment, but I mean, talk about hand in glove coming back to the team he knows, coaching staff, a lot of the same players are still here. It should be seamless. And if he can hit the ground running, it's going to be a ton of fun. Like, Lions football has been fun, as you said. Like, Vernon Adams, when he was healthy, was putting on a show. Then he got hurt. His play dropped. Team obviously has struggled here of late. But, yeah, I mean, Nathan Rourke has a chance to really step in here and sort of light this market on fire again, the way that he did in that summer of 2022.
Some comments on Twitter or on YouTube. 7-6 says VA is coming back soon. It says it's not a long-term injury. No, he's officially week to week. That was, holy crap, we've got nobody else to throw the football. Can you play? Yeah, I can probably play. He's not going to do any further injury. He can probably play. Vernon Adams was not a week to week for 100% back of Vernon Adams. As many people pointed out, Vernon Adams coming back this week or next week would have been Vernon Adams in a RoboCop, knee brace, as a bit of a shadow of his real self. You no longer have to deal with that. You can get Nathan Rourke in the fold. And then when he is 100%, do you even make any tough decisions there? Peter on YouTube saying cut Vernon Adams, V. Adams.
Not in a Grey Cup year.
No.
Not in a Grey Cup year. Like, there's no guarantees. It's contact sport. Nathan Rourke can take a knock. Like, the insurance policy of having the guy that right now is the favorite to be the most outstanding player in the Canadian Football League, like, it does harken back to 2004. If people were around and following the Lions back then, when Dave Dickinson and Casey Printers both playing at an electric level. And that was in the Grey Cup year for the Lions as well. Well, they went to the Grey Cup. They weren't hosting the Grey Cup.
Yeah.
They're hosting the Grey Cup. That doesn't guarantee them a spot, but man, what an insurance policy to have if you've got the 2 best quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League on the same roster. Come on. So no, there'll be a time where a decision has to be made, but I think for the balance of the second half of this season, you keep both guys in the fold. You ask them to be good teammates and good friends and support each other and put the team first, because it should be about winning the Grey Cup under the dome in mid-November.
If you do get rid of Vernon Adams, you do it via trade if you can. Yeah, I know CFL trades aren't a dime a dozen here, especially for the higher paid ones. I would think you could probably pull off a deal involving Vernon Adams with having to outright cut him. But as Jeff, you pointed out, many others will, you want to be playing in that. Imagine cutting or trading away Vernon Adams. Nathan Rourke plays 2 weeks and then gets hurt, and you're back to Chase Price. Like, you're not doing that.
You're phoning Jake Dolegala to come back.
Yeah, like that is just not happening. So it's going to be feasting with the quarterbacking the rest of the way. Neighborhood Brewing will be releasing another brew from the vault on Friday, August the 16th. That's in a couple of days. The Bluish Blue Hawaiian IPA. This re-release is their take on the Blue Hawaiian cocktail, bursting with pineapple and tropical fruit flavor. Call me thirsty. That sounds absolutely delicious, coming from Neighborhood Brewing. That's where Matt Sekeres is right now, by the way. Maybe he'll be able to sneak one of those. So the Oilers had the chance to sign these 2 guys, Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, to much cheaper deals. clearly there's management blame there for playing the long game. I mean, the players are asking for money, so it's a negotiation. But ultimately, do you owe it to yourself just to get ink to paper and get those players across the line? Probably. I'm sure there's a section of the fan base. I'm always curious about how low a percentage point this is. But the players, and I was unclear on this early in my career. Like, do you just submit the offer sheet and that's and it's done? No. The players signed, like, it's like signing the player to the contract. The players sign off on this. Philip Broberg has said, unless the Oilers match, I am good with this. I will be a St. Louis Blue. They're putting their John Hancock on that. Do Oilers fans turn on the player for putting them in this predicament, for showing maybe a lack of loyalty, a sense of that at the very least? I don't feel like the players often get a big piece to blame, even though, again, Philip Broberg may have quadrupled his salary here.
Right. He was a restricted free agent with no leverage. And as he said, it looked like he was going to drift until he accepted whatever the Oilers put in front of him.
Pretty much.
He's making $4.58 million in each of the next 2 years. And then that's where the meter starts for his next contract in terms of qualifying offers. So he's setting himself up nicely here. I don't know how you blame the player in that one. Holloway's a little bit more interesting to me in as much as, yeah, it's a raise. Again, I think the Oilers are going to match Holloway. So I don't think that ultimately he's going to run, but he's getting a raise either way. But when you think of the opportunities for a forward in Edmonton, and he's one of the young forwards, he's got size, he's got speed, a chance to play for the Stanley Cup this past year, and the Oilers have designs on getting back there again. The raise isn't as significant for Dylan Holloway, but it's still a raise. And so I don't think you blame either of the players. These guys have short careers, short windows. You take the money, and if the Oilers weren't going to give him a raise, this is sort of a roundabout way. Yeah, it involved the third team and the potential, or a second team and the potential of having to pack up and move to St. Louis. Again, I think the Oilers are going to match Holloway. So in the end, he's going to get himself a raise over the next couple of years. But for Broberg, just a no-brainer to me. If you were looking at $1 million and a team comes in and puts a $4.58 million contract offer in front of you for the next couple of seasons, nobody's turning that down. Nobody.
Got to sign it. Some of the avenues available to the Oilers to make this happen, of course, there's already been a lot of talk about Evander Kane going on LTIR. That helps you for a time. Of course, depends on how long he's on LTIR. Trading away Cody Ceci has been bandied about quite a bit. I don't think he's hurt his stock, Cody Ceci, of late. He's been fine, but he's prone to the pizza, and he's not a prolific point getter. That 10-goal season seems like forever ago for him. So and teams know why you'd be wanting to trade Cody Ceci, so you're not getting much in return.
Right, and I think he's got a year left at $3.25 million. Earlier in the summer, if you were looking to clear some cap space, right shot defenders, we always talk about the premium there, maybe there's a deal to be made. Now, every team in the league knows that you are over a barrel. Nobody's going to do you any kind of favor. It's like, I think it would cost, and it might cost significantly, to move off that contract. And so any way you come at this, I mean, the St. Louis Blues have completely boxed the Edmonton Oilers in. And this is where we say, like, even as the cap goes up in a cap world, every dollar matters. And I just can't get past this idea that really the Oilers are in this predicament because a guy like Darnell Nurse is making $9.25 million in the third year of an 8-year contract. They're going to be paying him that through 2030, unless at some point even the Oilers tap out and just buy him out.
Or the salary cap gets escalated at such a rate that a middle-of-the-road defenseman making 9 point doesn't feel as bad. But, man, it's going to have to be
we're not there yet.
A steep upward climb in order to get to that point. Yeah, there's an issue. Let me ask you this, and people are already talking about this. Stan Bowman was a controversial hire by the Edmonton Oilers. It's unclear what the rest of the league as a group feels about Stan Bowman in the wake of what happened. I'm sure there are some that feel like he was a scapegoat, that he was hard done by. I'm sure others feel like he's sullied the name of NHL general managers everywhere. I don't know where Doug Armstrong falls on that spectrum. Would this have happened if Ken Holland, notorious nice hockey man,
right,
was still in that, or anybody else for that
matter? I think
hired somebody else.
I think it's a fair question. I don't look at it as, this is Doug Armstrong welcoming Stan Bowman back to the NHL with a poison pill. I do think this is the St. Louis Blues recognizing a team that's in cap hell and pouncing. And again, I commend them for doing that. The one thing I do wonder a little bit is, like, ultimately, if the Oilers match, then okay, the St. Louis Blues miss out on an opportunity, but they really don't have any skin in the game in as much as all they're doing is jacking the salary. Like, should the Oilers or should the Blues or any team offering an offer sheet be forced to pony up something? Like, I want to look at it more like a high stakes poker game where you got to put something in the pot to play. The Blues don't have to do that. I mean, yes, they're accepting they're going to overpay Philip Broberg for the next couple of years, but he is a guy that they can plug in their lineup and he's going to play. And so I do wonder if the NHL should take a look at the whole system, because I think it's great. I mean, it's got us talking and the Canucks aren't even involved, but I think, in the middle of summer, it's one of those things. It's like, I always say, nothing gets people talking like a trade. Well, an offer sheet might be right there in that same neighborhood. But back to your question, I don't know that it's personal because I don't know the backstory between Doug Armstrong and Stan Bowman. Obviously, they were rivals in St. Louis and Chicago for a long time, and Chicago with the upper hand and the cups to show for it. But I just think this was more timing and an opportunity. This is the Blues pouncing on an opportunity. But yeah, welcome back to the National Hockey League, Stan Bowman. Work your way out of this one.
In terms of greasing the wheels, I'm of two minds of this. And they reduced, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they reduced the compensation a handful of years ago. And they've changed the thresholds a little bit as inflation has arrived. If you made it a little bit more fruitful for the surrendering team, in this case, the Oilers, would they be more willing to walk away? Or that dissuade, like if you're looking to increase these transactions, if you lessen the compensation for the offering team, yeah, they will be more willing to offer, but you're less willing to succumb, because if all you're getting back is a second round pick, what's in it for you other than the cap relief, I suppose. But if you got a slightly more robust return, you might say, oh, that's sort of like a mediocre trade. I guess we'll walk away from the player. So I don't know if they've nailed the compensation. I'm not going to go through it all because it's not good audio or video. But I mean, up into a 4.58 cap hit, it's just a second round pick. It is pretty tantalizing. We talked about some of the names that are left on the menu right now, not a ton of good ones. But 4.58 is pretty decent change.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And all you're getting back is second round.
Yep. And we always, when these happen, because they are rare, and we saw the Montreal Carolina sort of battle, right? Like the offer sheet for Sebastian Aho, and then payback. There we saw the Kotkaniemi one. We always wonder, like, is this going to be the move that starts to make this happen more regularly? And I don't think it is, but it does underscore getting your business done and having your house in order. And for the Vancouver Canucks to get Artur Silovs signed to a 2-year contract at $850,000, like, he could have sat there on the open market hoping that there was another team out there that was going to come down Offer Street Boulevard. It didn't happen for him, but it's just a reminder that that was good work by the Vancouver Canucks to get that contract signed, sealed, delivered, taken care of so that they were not open to this. Because ultimately, when you look at the Edmonton Oilers, it's the middle of August. They've known for the longest time that this was a possibility, whether they believed that it was going to happen under the terms of the CBA. This was very much a possibility. And so I do think that you can take the long look and say, shame on you, Oilers, should have been able to get this done so that you were never in this predicament in the first place.
The same two players that were possible for this year remain possible as the next possible offer sheet targets, Nils Höglander and Artur Shilovs. It just means that if Nils Höglander has a good season this year, a reminder to Canucks management to get on it again and get signed, sealed, and delivered so that you don't have to worry about this sort of thing. And it's a show me year again for Nils Höglander, I think, at his age and in his contract predicament. So both sides will be monitoring that. Shilovs has the extra year, so a little bit of room. And then, of course, there's a couple of guys coming down the pike eventually in Lekkerimäki and Wielander that will need some monitoring. Vasily Podkolzin got that extra year as well. So even if Podkolzin had a good year, Canucks still are a couple of years away from having to worry about Podkolzin getting offer sheeted. And if Podkolzin had just signed a 1-year deal, I would say that would be an interesting one to watch as well, because somebody could overpay for a player like that if Podkolzin were to be okay. Speaking of things that could happen more often in the NHL that don't, changing captains midstream. Austin Matthews named captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs today. John Tavares shuffled over to a mere A. Why doesn't this happen more often? Are we too worried about hurt feelings?
Yes, absolutely.
Much like offer sheets, too worried about hurt feelings.
That's what it boils down to. That we all know that Austin Matthews should be the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
He's the leader of the team.
And John Tavares, I had to look. I'll admit I was surprised. 65 points last year.
Totally decent year. Yeah.
So it's not like he's not contributing.
Not a fourth-line player now. No.
But Austin Matthews is the heartbeat. He's the face. He is the leader of that hockey club. And, there's not a rule book that says the best player has to be the captain. But I just think if you looked and you asked around that locker room, they would know that it's Austin Matthews' team.
And it's not a castration, for God's sakes. Like, John Tavares is going to be okay. He's still going to be a voice in the room.
And I think you commend him for his years of the captaincy and the job that he did, but it's not a birthright, and you don't take it to the grave. I am surprised that this doesn't happen a little more. And I was looking around, Gabriel Landeskog is still the captain in Colorado. Hasn't played in over a year and may never play again.
Right.
At some point, they're going to have to slap the C on Nathan MacKinnon.
And you can bet Nathan MacKinnon is the operating captain. He is doing all the captain things.
So again, you say, hey, Gabe, you gave it your best. You gave us a lot of years of service, won a cup, all that kind of stuff.
But when you come back, you'll have an A on your jersey.
And you'll still, exactly. There's a role for you here. But times change. Jordan Staal in Carolina, nowhere close to the best player on that team anymore.
No.
Has served them well, but I don't know. I think you can make an argument there. Logan Couture in San Jose. Again, maybe you go a couple years without a captain in San Jose before Macklin Celebrini or any of the young players as they turn their roster over. Even a guy like Jamie Benn in Dallas, I think at some point, they're going to have to make a decision there. So I'm more of this opinion that, you run with it for a bunch of years, but just because you have it doesn't mean that you're always going to have it. Are
we past the fourth line captain now? Because
I think so. Yeah.
There's such a minimal role now. The stars are so bright. We're in a golden era of the NHL of star players on every team, basically.
Yeah. And I just think it opens to, with the salary structure now, and if a guy is making 10 times more than a fourth line,
preaching, yes,
right.
It's weird
a little bit. I think it opens itself to sort of some locker room dynamics that maybe you don't want at play here. So, not a surprise, probably the right call. Tavares is going to wear an A. I wonder if Chris Tanev at this stage of his career gets a letter in Toronto.
I mean, they've got a lot of candidates. So then you're probably you got the rotating A's, and that then you get a bigger envelope of players invited in. So if they do rotating A's, then yeah, I think that could very well come to pass. But they've got a lot of young stars there too. That then you're saying no to potentially if you're just doing static A's, you're saying no to one of Riley or Marner.
Marner, I think, has one foot out the door, so I'm not too worried about him.
Keep saying that.
I
but,
know.
I mean, we'll see.
Interesting. 6 teams in the NHL without a captain.
6.
Yeah.
And that's because somebody just left, though, or are those?
Anaheim,
Yeah.
Buffalo, Chicago is waiting, I think.
Right. Yes.
Like rookie season,
That's a
Bedard
lot.
doesn't need that,
Yeah.
but at some point he'll get there. Seattle goes without a captain. Tampa, because Stamkos just left.
Right.
And the Utah Hockey Club.
I would bet Seattle anoints a captain this year. I would bet they finally go down that road. It's sort of time. Very interesting. Thank you to the Oilers and Blues for giving us something to talk about, and to a lesser degree, much lesser degree, the Toronto Maple Leafs. All right, time for the menu for today's show, brought to you by Greta Bar YVR at 50 West Cordova. This is a thick menu. Not quite that annoying restaurant that has just too much on the menu. You can't choose what you want, but we've got a lot coming up here. Tyler Yaremchuk from Oilers Nation gives us the Alberta perspective on the offer sheet news. Where is that market on who they can afford to lose, if anyone, and whose fault is it they're even in this predicament? With more in the news through the third party, Canucks lens, Rob Williams from the Daily Hive stops by to give us the pulse from the Canucks fans on what they're seeing here, and he has news there. And then with the full lowdown on the Nathan Rourke situation, the man with the call on what will likely be his return game, TSN's Glen Suitor, on what this return means for the team and the league as a whole. And those on the podcast side of things will, of course, get hashtags as well, and the best worst of Twitter, plus our E's and O's. And a big milestone for the Vancouver Canadians as well, who are on the road right now, but you can get your tickets for next Tuesday at CanadiansBaseball.com. Time for our best bets, brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Sekeres and Price. What do you got today?
Well, I was curious to see what the return of Nathan Rourke would do for the line on Sunday. Really hasn't done a lot. Lions favored by a point at home against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. We'll see if that changes. But as of this moment, the Lions favored by a point. Get them at about 90 for Sunday's showdown against the Bombers.
All right. I wondered what Nathan Rourke's immediate impact would be on most outstanding player on the betting lines. He slots in immediately at number 2 and just a hair above the other quarterback of the BC Lions. So, and this, I'm going to mention a name who's the leader right now. Remember, folks, both now Rourke and Adams are going to have muted total numbers because of time missed. So the betting favor right now, based, I would guess, just on accumulated totals, is Cody Fajardo at plus 100. But then there's Nathan Rourke at plus 240 and Vernon Adams at plus 350. I mean, that's interesting. Where if you had $10 to put down, where are you putting it?
Half a season left.
Yeah. So again, just for counting stats, Rourke and Adams are up against it here. To be so spectacular that the voters just have no choice but to vote for you.
Right, but will there be a recency bias if Nathan Rourke had a spectacular second half that took you to the voting? Is there enough runway left?
Very interesting.
Seems difficult.
Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code BANBONUS the next time you do. Busy show ahead. We find out the reaction from Edmonton next with Tyler Yaremchuk. Normally when we talk about Greta Bar YVR, we're telling you to make it a game night at Greta, and we're talking about hockey. Of course, we're not quite yet at hockey season, but game night can mean whatever it means, and that could mean soccer or football game to watch on the screen, or your own games, because the arcade is half the fun at Greta Bar YVR. Make it your game night at 50 West Cordova. And of course, great food and drink specials. And you can also make it a late game night, as they're open late every single night. So make it a late game night, your game night at Greta Bar YVR, 50 West Cordova. Our first guest out of the hopper here, dealing with the big news of the National Hockey League right now. And it's news that I'm sure the Oilers didn't think they would be making, as two of their valued players get offer sheeted by the St. Louis Blues. From Oilers Nation, Tyler Yaremchuk joins us here on Sekeres and Price. Tyler, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, boys. Hope your summer's going well.
Yeah, and it was going well, I'm sure, for the Edmonton Oilers. They made all sorts of good news in free agency. They'd, ticked a lot of boxes, and then kaboom, the Blues come calling. How did this news go down this week here at Edmonton with the possible losses of a couple of big players?
Yeah, well, it didn't go over all that great. You have a fan base, and I mean, some fans are angry at the players for taking the offer sheets. They're angry at the Blues for being this aggressive with the offer sheets. They're angry at the Oilers for not signing these two guys earlier. So there's a lot of fingers being pointed everywhere. Whose fault is this? And it caught a lot of us by surprise. When we kind of were breaking down the Oilers cap situation over the last number of weeks, it was like, okay, the Kane LTIR stuff was starting to bubble up, and it was, you have Holloway and Broberg. Neither of them have arbitration rights. And it was like, okay, most of the time in these situations, they let it play out into September, and then the team kind of squeezes the player down to more or less whatever number they want to. And we said the only kind of leverage that Broberg and Holloway have is to sign an offer sheet. And then it was like, well, no one ever signs offer sheets. So what do the Oilers have to worry about? And then lo and behold, an offer sheet comes through, and it's a pretty tough one to match. Like, the Blues obviously knew what they were doing in all of this, and now the Oilers are in a real pinch.
Fans hate to get mad at players, guys, but it is unbelievable that doesn't happen more. It is the player that signs the offer sheet. They are involved in this process, and they often get absolved of any sort of finger pointing. It always just kind of lays down at the feet of the team.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I'm not going to be one to blame Philip Broberg specifically in all of this, because it's like, okay, you played 10 good games in the playoffs. Outside of that, you've never really been a regular NHL defenseman, and you've turned those 10 good games into $9 million guaranteed over the last 2 years, and business is business. If Broberg would have came onto the Oilers last year at a $900,000 contract and blown out his knee in November and been out for 6 months, the Oilers wouldn't have been like, you know what, we feel bad for you. Here's a couple $1,000,000. Like, he would have just been hooped. And this is his one career, his one chance to go out and make money. The one that honestly was a bit more surprising to me was Dylan Holloway, just because, again, the Oilers would have given him around $1 million next year. And they would have said, here's a spot in the top 9. Here's potentially a spot next to Leon Draisaitl. Go out, have a big year, and who knows, if you pop 20 goals, you could be making a lot more money in Edmonton than you could be somewhere else, because of the opportunity that comes playing with McDavid and Draisaitl. Going to St. Louis, again, yeah, okay, he got a couple extra $1 million guaranteed. That's not insignificant. I'm not trying to downplay that. Like, go get your money. But there's a part of me that's like, okay, you're a young guy in your career. You're a first-round pick. Do you really want to give up the opportunity to play with a Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid to go play with Alexei Torpchenko on the Blues third line? Like, I don't think your chance to make long-term career earnings is as great in St. Louis as it might be in Edmonton.
You touched on it briefly just off the top there, but there is this sense of, hey, why didn't the Oilers just take care of their business sooner, and none of this would have happened? Now, it's been an interesting offseason. Obviously, they played deep into June, followed by the draft, and then the transition from Kenny Holland to Stan Bowman. People were already skeptical about Stan Bowman getting back in the National Hockey League. Is there an element that this somehow just kind of fell through the cracks, or is that too simple, and that, even in a transition period, you got to be on top of your business matters when you're running an NHL team?
So I think the big mistake was not trying to get something done during the season with these two and trying to lock in some amount of cost certainty before the free agency period opened. Because, now you're sitting there kicking yourself going, okay, we love the Jeff Skinner signing. We love the Victor Arvidsson signing. Okay, maybe you didn't need both of those guys. Maybe your forward group was good enough as is that you didn't need to overspend in that area. And now you're at risk of losing two pretty good young players. So I think the mistake was not signing them during the season. As for not signing them in the summer, I mean, by making the decision to let it get to the summer, you've kind of made your bed to an extent that, you're going to squeeze them for every possible penny. I think the talk was Broberg wanted something around 1.8, Holloway wanted something around 1.2, and it just didn't get done because, again, the Oilers couldn't really afford that. By the time they'd spent their money in free agency, it was like, okay, you're going to let this get to September. You're going to cross your fingers and hope they don't sign an offer sheet somewhere. And then come September 15th, when camp opens up and those guys get the itch, you go, okay. And they did it with Ryan McLeod a couple of years ago too. He ended up signing after scoring like 12 or 13 goals the year before. He ended up signing for $781,000. It was like right on the line of what they needed him to be at. So I think the Oilers just kind of thought their plan of waiting, hoping for no offer sheet, getting to September, and then getting those guys on dirt cheap deals because they have no leverage. I think they thought it would work out. And honestly, like, I don't even really blame them for that, because again, we've seen 2 offer sheets in the last 10 years of the NHL. Like, the idea that some team was going to come at you in this exact predatory fashion, it was a tad unrealistic to think that someone was actually going to have the kahunas to do it.
Now, I know the Oilers have through the weekend to make their decision, and probably will take this thing right down to the wire. I also have seen an awful lot of noise coming out of Edmonton and around the National Hockey League. You mentioned Evander Kane. He could go on LTIR. Like, there are some ways to come at this, and one of them is, oh, well, maybe they could move Cody Ceci and free up that space in the final year. I think it's 3 1/4 for Cody Ceci. In late August, is there a market for Cody Ceci around the National Hockey League, or would the Oilers have to pay to get off that contract?
Maybe a week ago they wouldn't have. And it certainly sounds like, listening to different insiders and things like that, that if they wanted to move Cody Ceci earlier in the summer, there was a market for him and they could have done it. The old saying that our pal Frank likes to throw out is, if you're a GM and you're drowning, the other GMs don't throw you a life raft, they throw you an anvil. And right now, I don't think if there was a GM, whether it's San Jose, Anaheim, whatever team was willing to step up and trade for Cody Ceci, if before they were saying, hey, we'll give you a 4th round pick for him, the tables might be turned now. It might be like, oh, no. You're going to give us a 4th round pick and we'll take Cody Ceci off your hands. So I think they'll have to pay to get off him. And that's another thing that now goes into the equation of all of this. Is like, okay, if you don't match Broberg, you're getting a 2nd round pick. If you don't match Holloway, you're getting a 3rd round pick. If you now all of a sudden have to match, or you want to, I should say, match on both those guys, but then you have to give up a 4th or a 5th round pick to get out of Cody Ceci, it's kind of like you start doing the math of, okay, they're both going to be overpaid on these next deals. Like, Philip Broberg is nowhere near worth $4.5 million, and he's going to have to be paid $4.5 million for 2 years. And then to qualify him when he's still in RFA the 3rd and 4th years, he's going to have to be a $5 million defenseman for you. So it's like, okay, instead of getting the 2nd and the 3rd, you can keep the young players. Then you got to pay to get out of CC, and you have these 2 big contracts on your books, and you have all these sort of different factors that come in. And like, it's going to take the Oilers 6 days to sort out what they want to do here, because there's so many different factors at play.
There's a lot of math here, and it's really hard. Do you buy that Doug Armstrong made the 2 offers with the intention of really only getting one of them? Like, does he have to overwhelm the Oilers with all of these decisions, with all this math, in order to extract one of them? And, I don't know if he's trying to angle them towards one guy or the other. Most people think they match Holloway. Maybe they give up on Broberg. But was this strategy from Doug Armstrong, do you think?
It was great because of the exact dollar amounts and the way things played in. And I do think it's an angle to get Philip Broberg. When you look at the Blues, everything we heard reported about them heading into the summer is they were trying to mix up their blue line. Frank had said, all 3 of Parayko, Leddy, Krug, those guys were on the trading block. Now Krug, I know, is done for the year. He's got that long-term injury thing, and that obviously opens up some money. So you kind of look at the Blues plan coming into the summer, and then the Krug news that they're going to be without him now. And it's like, it makes sense that they want to add a good young defenseman into their prospect pool, which again goes back to, it's puzzling why Dylan Holloway would want to accept this. Like, for Broberg, it's a chance to make, instead of over the next 2 years, $2 or $3 million with the Oilers, he's making $9 million with the St. Louis Blues. For Holloway, it's like, okay, you're making an extra $2 million. Again, I said this earlier, not insignificant, but you're passing up on a great opportunity to play in Edmonton, and it feels like you're a bit of a pawn in this whole situation. And maybe even Dylan Holloway knew he was a pawn, and his agent said, hey, the Oilers are going to match this thing for you. You're going to get your money. You're going to get to stay in Edmonton. Like, just go along with the plan here and do a solid for your boy Philip. But again, the Holloway thing's puzzling, because this does feel like St. Louis is making a hard pitch or a hard move to get Broberg, and Holloway's just kind of sitting there like a pawn on the chessboard.
It's funny. I mean, obviously, we in Vancouver keep pretty close tabs on the Oilers, saw them in the playoffs, watched them go to the Stanley Cup final. I guess I knew this, but it sort of was driven home again yesterday. I was looking at their roster and their depth chart. And I expect that they'll retain one of these two. But if they were both to go, like Connor McDavid would be left as one of the youngest players on the Edmonton Oilers. They really and they're in this cup window. Again, I get it, but they don't have an awful lot of young depth and talent. They traded first rounders to get guys like Ekholm. This is not a young hockey club.
Can they afford to lose both is basically it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, this is, again, where the conversation and the debate gets even more complicated. When you look at the pieces on their blue line, it's like, hey, Darnell Nurse isn't getting any younger. You mentioned Ekholm, Kulak, Ceci, like not a lot of youth to go around there. Philip Broberg kind of stands out in that regard. When you look at the forward group, McDavid and Draisaitl, like they'll be productive into their mid-30s, no concerns there. But they did make a move a month and a bit ago to go get Matt Savoy from the Buffalo Sabres in that Ryan McLeod trade. And it's kind of like, okay, now you do have this kind of piece of young talent. Raph Lavoie is another guy. I view him as a tweener. Some people still think he has upside, but you can look at the forward side of things and kind of go like, oh, there's a few interesting young pieces. Now you got Matt Savoy, who was a top 10 pick a couple years ago. Like if the money was even, it makes way more sense to keep Philip Broberg in the mix. Like he was slated to play on their second pairing. Granted, on the right side, they were going to play him on his offside, but he was kind of going to be relied on to be a second pairing defenseman for the Oilers. Dylan Holloway probably slotted on the third line to start. What's easier to replace, a third line left winger or a top four right side defenseman? Well, it's the third line left winger. So again, with the addition of Savoy, with the roles and where these guys were kind of slotted on the depth chart, and the fact that they do need to keep some youth around in some parts of their lineup, it makes way more sense to keep Philip Broberg. But again, the contract and the money and all of that adds another wrinkle into it. And yeah, the fact that they have to give up one of their next 2 first-round picks now because they wanted to trade into the first round this past year, which is fine. You added a prospect into the system, but there is not a lot of youth down in Bakersfield right now. Even when we look at the guys who are on the list of call-ups, it's like Ruby Jarventi, who's a guy they picked up from Ottawa. He's been bouncing around in the AHL for a couple of years. It's Lane Peterson. He's kind of seen as the guy who's like, oh, maybe he surprises us and make the team. And he's, 27, 28 years old. So not a lot of young talent in Edmonton, but I guess that's what comes with being in the window that they've been in the last number of seasons.
Even unsigned draft picks, guys. The highest pedigreed one is 21-year-old Luca Munzenberger, who's a third-round pick in terms of defensemen. So again, boy, you're going to miss Philip Broberg if you don't. Let me ask you this, and this is just going to be pure speculation. Do these 2 offer sheets happen if it's not Bowman as GM, if it's somebody else? Is there an axe to grind here? Is there a sense of, I don't care what this guy thinks of me after all that's gone down? Now, these are 2 tried and true hockey men that have both been around for a long time. I would have guessed without knowing either of them that they know each other and probably have been fond and had been cordial with each other in years gone by. Contemporaries, if you will. But it just seems a little weird. Bowman gets this controversial appointment, and he's the one that gets offer sheeted immediately.
Well, if you want to go, real tinfoil hat conspiracy here, like, okay, Ken Holland, I'm not sure how willing Ken Holland was to walk away at the end of all this. I know there was some back and forth about could there be another role. I think there were points where maybe Holland wanted to stay and he felt like he was getting lowballed. Holland and Doug Armstrong are old buddies. Like they go way back. So was this Ken Holland maybe nudging Doug Armstrong saying, yeah, go do me a solid. Go message him a little bit. Also, you know who else is working in the Blues front office right now? It's Peter Chiarelli. So Chiarelli has a connection there. Holland has a connection to Doug Armstrong, and maybe he's not happy about having to leave the organization when he did and feeling like he maybe got pushed out a little bit. And then you have the Bowman-Armstrong connection, Central Division, Blackhawks, Blues. They would have had a history together there and a bit of a rivalry. There's the Canada-USA thing with Bowman and Armstrong as well. So, yeah, like there's no doubt those 2 go back, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do have a little bit of a rivalry. Then you look at the connections Armstrong has to now former Oilers GMs, and it's like, yeah, okay, maybe this was done a little bit maliciously. Like, okay, if we have the assets to do it, they went out of their way to go reacquire their second-round pick to do this. So everything just lined up perfectly, I think, for St. Louis. And Doug Armstrong probably got a couple of text messages from Holland and Chiarelli with a nice little thumbs up saying, way to stick it to him.
Let's just kind of play this experiment out then and say, for the sake of this argument, that Broberg winds up in St. Louis and Evander Kane isn't ready for the start of the season and may not be around for a chunk of the season. How much of a blow are those 2 moves to a hockey club that continues to have Stanley Cup aspirations.
We're asking for a friend here. Yes.
I don't think the Kane one is that much of a blow because throughout the course of the regular season, this Oilers offense is gonna find a way to produce, right? Like you brought in Arvidsson, you brought in Skinner. The only piece you really lost, I guess you do lose Kane, and then you also lost Vogel, but I think Skinner and Arvidsson are upgrades there. So the Kane thing isn't that big of a deal. I actually think it's kind of nice that they'll be able to, hopefully for the Oilers' sake, just bring him into the lineup on night one of the playoffs and have a healthy and hopefully motivated Evander Kane. The Broberg loss it's significant, and it was a gamble going the route they were going anyways, where it's like, okay, let's hope this guy who, again, has played 10 good games of NHL hockey in his career, let's hope he can play the right side, his offside, for an entire season as a top 4 defenseman. Because if he ends up being the one that goes to St. Louis, you're looking at a right side depth chart that is Bouchard, Ceci, Stetcher. Like, that's not exactly good. Cody Ceci kind of stinks. Troy Stetcher is a 6'7" defenseman. One of those guys is going to have to play 20 plus minutes a night for you. And it's kind of like, okay, the blue line, it's going to be a problem. And then I guess you would get the 2nd round pick for Broberg, and maybe you try to use that in some sort of a trade, but you're in LTIR space. Making deals in season is way more difficult when you're dealing with an LTIR pool. So it's the Broberg loss is significant. Even if it was, like I said, a risk to put him into that spot to begin next season, it's still better than the alternative. And if they're faced with the alternative heading into October, I think it has a chance to make life really difficult on Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard. One guy who's a journeyman and the other guy who has, over the last number of years, as much as he's had his stretches of 2-3 months where he looks like a top 10 goalie, Skinner's had his stretches of 4 to 6 weeks where it's like, whoa, they need to get a better goalie to play with this guy. So I think it could really hurt the Oilers losing Broberg. Granted, it could have been a problem if Broberg stayed too, but regardless, I think keeping pucks out of their net might be a bit of a problem for the Oilers next year.
I'm hearing Stan Bowman is online. One, he'd like to correct you. Cody Ceci is not terrible. He's very good. It would be a great addition to any team in the National Hockey League if they would like to trade for him. Tyler, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it. Gives us a good lowdown on what's going on in Edmonton, and we'll see how this plays out over the next few days.
Sounds good. See you, boys.
The Vancouver Canadians are back at the net. Catch fireworks, giveaways, and Friday nooners all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com. There have been various times in my career where I have spoken to this guy almost every day on the air, but it has been far too long here on Sekeres Price or any other spot to chat with TSN's Glen Suitor, who joins us here on Sekeres and Price. And a big old welcome back, and thanks for doing this. Appreciate it, Glen.
Thank you, guys. First time caller. Let me
Yes, that's right.
Big CFL news means big guests here on Sekeres and Price,
yes,
right?
That's right.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be back with you guys.
Well, it's a perfect time to bring you on because you know the local market, being a resident here, but you also know the enormity of this Nathan Rourke news as it pertains to the league. And both of those things we want to get into with you. So let's start with the league-wide scope here, first of all. And that is, what does this mean to the Toronto Argonauts, even, the Red Blacks, just getting another MOP caliber quarterback into a league that, in my opinion, and maybe you differ from this, it might be this league needs a little bit of a quarterback upgrade. Not in every spot, obviously, but I think this is big to get one of 9 quarterbacks back that is an MOP caliber. I mean, to me, that's huge news for the league.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in any league it would be, but it's certainly, with our league, that the quality of quarterback play is always so important to just the excitement, entertainment value, all of it. So, and, not to mention the fact that Nathan, in this case, is Canadian as well, I think is, really a bonus. But at the end of the day, Nathan, when he arrived on the scene, could process plays, read defenses, and process plays faster than any quarterback I have ever covered, played against, or played with in the CFL. And that's covering now 40 years. So, with great due respect to guys like Doug Flutie and even Warren Moon, who I didn't play against but watched, I think this guy has a gift of recognition and processing speed like I've never seen. I think he would have been a Pro Bowl. I've said it many times. If the NFL gave him a real chance, he would have been a Pro Bowler within a year or two. And he just never got the chance. And I think he just had enough of the politics, enough of sort of being way down the depth chart, even though he was probably, I wasn't at those camps, but even though he was probably the better quarterback. So it happens all the time down there. I have said it many times, guys, and I think he just had enough of it and said, okay, time to go and get some playing time. And it's fantastic for the entire league, not just the Lions, the entire league, to have a high quality player who happens to be Canadian as well, that this league can market.
Sounds like we might see him as early as Sunday. In fact, he's coming to town. He's going to practice here. What about the challenges, Glenn, of finding the rhythm of the game? You know, he's been scratching and clawing just to get snaps in the National Football League and got, fourth quarter action in Atlanta on Friday, but now he's going to be the guy. What about finding the rhythm of 60 minutes of football?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's a stretch at all to think he can start this week and be successful, honestly, because he knows the system. He knows Jordan Maximic. One of the reasons that he wanted to come back to Vancouver if he was going to return to the CFL was because of the trust he has with Rick Campbell and Jordan Maximic, the offensive coordinator. So because of that relationship, and that it's the exact same offense he was in a couple of years ago, he's going to be comfortable in the system. So that's the first step. But, you're right. I mean, the difference in a wide field out throw in the Canadian Football League and the NFL is completely different. It's a different angle. It's a different, you have to put a different amount of zip on the football to get it out there. It's a 65-yard wide field, so you're not throwing on a postage stamp anymore. When you throw that wide side out, you better put something on it, or it's going the other way. So he has to get back into that rhythm and figure out the nuance of Canadian football again. But I don't think it'll take long. I really don't. He's been watching the game all the time. He's following the Lions, and he knows this offense.
All due respect, too, him at 68% is better than Jake Magala and Chase Price, and then that's due respect to those two guys.
Yeah, well, I think, maybe they have a future, maybe they don't. But this guy we've seen, and we know what he can do. And this was MOP type stuff. Again, the fastest processing speed I've seen. When we say the high percentage throws versus the low percentage throws, the low percentage throws are those deep balls, and his accuracy on those deep balls was incredible. Like I've never seen in my time in the league. So, I don't want to create expectation. He's not going to come in here and do it all by himself. He needs the entire team to play well. He needs the receivers to play well, and he needs to get back in the flow of getting hit every play, running the offense every series. So he's got to get back in that, but I have no doubt it won't take long.
It's such good news for the Lions, and as Blake said, for the league. I'm not sure it's the news that Vernon Adams necessarily was hoping for. Now, they've been together before. This is such a big year for the BC Lions in terms of opportunity in front of them with the Grey Cup here in November. But if you're VA, Glenn, how do you take this news?
Well, knowing VA the way I do, I know he's taking it and putting the team first. He understands the reason for it. He understands the quality of player that Nathan Rourke is. He's now becoming his teammate, so therefore they're going to both put the team first. I think we may see examples of when both are healthy that you may see, for whatever reason, Vernon Adams start a game. He's going to be an important part of the team. I'll tell you a quick story about Vernon Adams to give you an idea of what type of player this guy is. When they go on the road and come back from a long road trip, they're all on the bus coming back from the airport. They go back to the stadium. They drop off all their bags, and then they all go their separate ways from there. Vernon Adams will ask the equipment manager if he needs help unloading the bags and help with the laundry. Now think about that. That's a star quarterback, your franchise player at this point, before the return of Nathan, your franchise player, and he's asking the equipment guy if he needs any help with the laundry. That's the type of person he is. You've heard about him bringing receivers, in the offseason to his home. He pays that whole bill by himself. He takes care of his O-line. That's what this guy does. So 2 quarterback systems can work in the CFL. I certainly was personally involved with a 2-quarterback system in Tom Burgess and Kent Austin that produced a championship. So, you know, I think that's the way they'll look at it, and that's the way Vernon will look at it. If either one of them gets really hot, the other one will just watch, and then in the off season, it'll be a different discussion.
It's funny. One of the first things I thought of was, how about the value add for the people that have bought tickets for Touchdown Pacific in a couple of weeks' time? Like, it's already going to be a great event. This isn't about selling tickets, but you said right off the top, hometown, a Victoria guy is now going to be front and center in a CFL game in Victoria.
Yeah, how cool is that? And not only that, but Amar Doman, who is still my MVP in the league, by the way, because he's just continuing to set the bar higher for all the ownership in the league, including the new owner, Larry Thompson in Edmonton. But yeah, I think this is just sort of a bonus, and that viewing party. The game has been sold out since day 2 of the sales, tickets going on sale. But there's also a viewing party right beside the stadium that has had great response and was going to be packed anyway. I'm assuming now that huge soccer field with the big screen is going to be completely crammed. And, you know, cool for Amar Doman. That's where his business started. Cool for this to bring Nathan Rourke back to that, to his hometown, basically. And yeah, that all timed up very nicely. And, you know, we'll see. Like, I think it's so good for the league in general, not just this team, that we have a top quarterback. Listen, in the last couple of years, we've had a Canadian has been the best rush end in the league. A Canadian has been the best tailback. Now we're seeing receivers become the best players in the league in Justin McInnis and others. And with Nathan and Trey Ford in the mix, very shortly we may see MOP Canadian quarterbacks playing in our game.
I think I saw Brady Oliveira on with Hustler there, Andrew Patterson, talking about how he's glad. He you know, again, all ships rise when the tide comes in, right? So
right.
He's happy that Nathan Rourke is back. Rourke's a class act too. You talked about the class act of Vernon Adams. Both of these guys know how things are supposed to be done in football. You know, just, you know, the order of things. And when Adams came in for Nathan Rourke, he said, no, this is Nathan's team. I'm just carrying this ball for Nathan right now, blah, blah, blah. Whose team is this right now? Because it's the team that Nathan Rourke left. He's just kind of coming back to his old job, but it's been Vernon Adams' team since he left. Whose team is this? How do they deal with the dynamics? It was pretty cut and dried whose team it was when Adams arrived. Whose team is it now?
I think that remains to be seen. I mean, I think right now it's both of theirs, and right now they will both sort of take ownership in their own way, and that will evolve on its own. And you're right about the character of both players. And if you have the right guys in that situation, it's not a locker room issue. If you have the wrong two guys, if you have an egomaniac in there and he's not playing, and then they're fighting each other, and then it divides the room, that can be a problem. But with these two, you're not going to have that problem. And Nathan knows that he's coming mid-season. I mean, he's going to be as much a team guy as Vernon Adams will be. And, you know, maybe Rick Campbell has an opportunity here to go with the hot hand, either guy. You know, and if something happens and there's a little nick or an injury somewhere along the way, look at the two guys you have. You have the front runner for MOP at this point in the season in Vernon Adams, and you have a former MOP quality player, an outstanding Canadian, right there in the mix, 1 and 1A. So yeah, I think as time goes on, we'll see how it develops as far as whose sort of team it is. And in the future, again, the offseason, we'll see what that brings, because there's some salaries involved here too, guys. They're going to have to balance when it comes to the salary cap.
Yeah, we can get into that again as well. But I want to touch on the injury thing too. Like, Vernon Adams has probably not even been healthy since the first few weeks of the season. I would guess now he's going to be hungry to get back at it and reclaim his job perhaps. But at the same time, doesn't this offer Vernon Adams the opportunity to actually fully rehab and make sure that when he comes back, he's 100%? Because there's just no point in him rushing to get back now.
Yes. And in fact, if the team wanted to, you know, again, tying in that financial aspect, they could put him on the 6th game. And then, And you can still take Vernon Adams off the 6 game early, and the 6 game just means that salary for those 6 weeks are not used against the salary cap, so it creates some space. So he still gets paid, obviously, but it's not cap space used up. So again, and I think, listen, if you're Amar Doman, you're Rick Campbell, and you're looking at, Nathan's contract is backloaded. So it's lesser, in the amount per year in the front end to help out with the cap. But if you're those guys and you're sitting in a meeting saying Nathan wants to be here, we want Nathan back. If we go over the cap a little bit, we'll pay the fine and move on. I think they'll balance that out. And again, we'll see in the offseason. I know there'll be plenty of teams, lots of teams that'll be very interested in a Vernon Adams in the offseason if they put him out for a trade.
So this is a football team that needs a shot in the arm. They were 5-1. All of a sudden, they've lost to 3 divisional rivals here. They've invited some of those teams below them in the standings back into the mix, and here they are at the midway mark now at 5-4. Nathan Rourke can come in. He can move the football. He can put points on the board. He can keep the offense on the field, but he doesn't play defense. And there are some issues. At least I don't think they're going to ask him to play defense. But what have you seen here? Certainly in these last 3 games, it just feels like there's been too many breakdowns, fundamentals, tackling issues. Where do they have to shore things up defensively to get back on track?
Yeah, and defense against the run has dropped off big time. And that, puts in the CFL puts you in a real bind when you're giving up too many yards on first down in the run game. So, yeah, that has been a concern. And in their last game, of course, they were banged up. They lost 4, I believe it was 4 starters on defense and had to really get into the rotation in a deep way. So those are things that Ryan Phillips has to figure out. And that's what I meant about Nathan Rourke not sort of being this savior and snap the losing streak all by himself. I mean, he's going to need the team to play better. I mean, Rick Campbell brought in bigger defensive linemen this year to play against the run and to actually sort of game plan against the Bombers and Brady Oliveira, as you mentioned, Blake, because they were the top dogs on the porch. So, to beat them, you're going to have to beat them to get to the cup. And, that has changed a little bit in the standings this year, but there's still that tough team with a good running game. So you're right. I mean, the defense got to play better. And Nathan's not going to be this savior. But when your offense is out there longer, putting together long drives, your defense gets more of a rest. And all of a sudden, that looks a lot different when they do get out there. So that's all going to work together. And it's like when you watch Trey Ford. When Trey Ford last weekend got the start, his second start after the Saskatchewan game, and he got his second start last weekend, the crowd reaction there and the way his team has been playing around him since he became the starter, now he's injured, but since he became the starter, was night and day different. I mean, the special teams played with a jump in their step. The defense played super aggressively, knowing that if they give up a big play, Trey Ford's going to find a way to bring them back. And in both games, they started down 7 points before he even came on the field. It didn't bother him. He kept moving, and the entire team played differently. So the combination of VA and Nathan with your offense and running that offense, I think will lift the entire team.
And it's the Lions and the Bombers and the upper deck is open. And this was happening before Nathan Rourke was coming back. I mean, this could be a lot of fun this weekend. Tell me you've got the assignment. Do you have the assignment for this one?
I do. In fact, I just got an email from our producer at TSN saying, what would you like to do for our pregame hit? And I just sent him 2 words, Nathan Rourke. We just have to know that it's official that he will be starting, because that hasn't been announced just yet. But it looks like he will, and that'll be the pregame. And by the way, guys, my phone blew up yesterday. Anecdotally, guys that I haven't talked to that were former teammates in beer league hockey that 10 years ago I knew, hey, can you get me any tickets? I want to see this Nathan Rourke guy. So again, Vernon Adams was worth the price of admission when he's been singing it and was hot early in the year. And now you add this to the mix, and good for ticket sales too.
I just happened to be back at TSN what was I doing? I'm doing an MLS game earlier this year, and the panel was doing a game, and that was when they were doing their top 5 quarterbacks in the league. Vernon Adams was number 1.
Right.
And they just added Nathan Rourke. It's an embarrassment of riches. Printers Dickinson, except maybe even better than that.
Yeah, honestly, and they'll both make it work, guys. They will both make it work. They're both team first guys. Let's put it this way: if VA was completely healthy and playing like he did when they were 5-1, on pace for over 6,000 yards and to break Doug Flutie's single season passing record, then I could really see Vernon Adams starting and Nathan working his way in as the backup for a few games or for the rest of the season even. That's what these guys are. They're both team guys first, so I don't think there'll be a problem in the room. Thanks for making this work, Suits. It was a pleasure to see your face and hear your voice again. So don't be a stranger and enjoy the game. I think this one's going to put up a number in Canada, as most of them do, but this one in particular. So you're right. You're right, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Anytime you need anything, I'm here. I love it.
It's happy hour on Sekeres and Price. Today's beer of the day from Yellow Dog is the Play Dead IPA. From the Oilers side of things, let's jump into Canucks Nation, if you will, and talk to Rob the Hockey Guy, Rob Williams from the Daily Hive, for the pulse of the Canuck fan base in reaction to all this. We wonder about FOMO, Rob. We wonder about the schadenfreude, if you will, too, from Canucks fans about just watching the chaos of these 2 offer sheets coming into the Oilers. What do you think the reaction is from Canuck faithful?
Well, I know the reaction from the Canucks faithful is sheer glee in watching watching the Oilers, get a real surprise here in August. This is something they did not think they were going to have to deal with. See a report from Elliot Friedman saying that effectively both players were looking for roughly half as much from the Oilers, and now the price more than doubled from what the Oilers would have thought they'd get these 2 players for. And I mean, I don't know that they're going to be able to keep both. I think there's probably a good likelihood that Broberg leaving seems like the one to me, but we'll see what kind of cap gymnastics Edmonton can pull off here. But yeah, the Canucks fans absolutely love this. I think the whole league kind of likes it. I think like offer sheets are kind of this unexpected part of free agency that teams just so rarely use. So I think people get really excited when one is used. And it's interesting with the Canucks. I think we kind of went a few years here without a real bona fide rival for the team, and now I think unquestionably, like, the Oilers are it. I think this is a nice little rivalry between the players, between the teams, but especially between the fan bases. They don't like each other very much.
Broberg's a young guy that's still unproven, but he is in their plans in Edmonton, although maybe not for much longer, because I'm with you. I think they probably will retain on Holloway and Broberg will find a new home. If, as you said, the rivalry's there, the measuring stick, obviously the Oilers got the better of the Canucks in 7 games in the playoffs. Does the loss of one young defenseman do enough to tip the scales in any way back in the Canucks' favor?
I don't know if that's alone will change it. Edmonton had a pretty good offseason too. I think people are pretty impressed with what Jeff Jackson did before he relinquished the general manager's seat. I don't know that that's gonna change it, but every little bit counts, right? Like, not just losing Broberg, but pay a little bit too much on Holloway. Those kinds of like little moves. Every little bit helps, to weaken. If it serves to weaken your rival, I think it's a good day for Canucks fans.
Do you get the feeling that there's a glee to the, that this could become a used tool again in the National Hockey League? We have to, and you've gone over already, these aren't used a lot.
Yeah.
But is this where the dam bursts? Is this where anybody realizes, oh, this we can use this, and the fact that it was a double dose as well, which is probably part of the strategy here for Doug Armstrong.
I think for this to really like truly change in the NHL, we'd have to see like a really successful example. Something where this really goes, like a team wins the Stanley Cup and they look back and say, it was that offer sheet that really did it for us. Or I think, to get into the copycat NHL, you'd have to have a situation where this really, really came out in their favor. And I don't know, like, can you think of many examples in the history of offer sheets and the limited examples where this really turned out well for the team? Like we look at, you look at like the last example was the Habs offer sheeted Sebastian Aho. They didn't get Aho, and then Carolina, retaliated on Kotkaniemi. So that didn't work out for the Habs, and Carolina got Kotkaniemi. I don't know that really worked out so well for them either. So
we'll see. That's a hell of a deal. That's a deal for eternity. So it may ultimately work out. We'll see.
You know what I mean? And like I go back to like the Dustin Penner one with the Oilers and the Ducks. It's too bad nobody was challenged to a barn fight this time. So that's a little disappointing. But yeah, like I just don't see that it would be nice if the rules were tweaked a little bit to give teams more incentive to pull this off. But it seems like you either get the player and overspend, or you don't get the player and it doesn't really accomplish much other than pissing off a rival GM, and then maybe you've got someone that's going to retaliate on you in the future.
And I think like history, and this is a generalization, but usually, and this St. Louis Edmonton one is another example of an inferior team, sort of a middle of the road team that has cap space, throwing a dart, targeting a team that is in cap hell. And so the idea that a middle of the road team is going to be able to poach an opposing player and somehow use that as a springboard to the Stanley Cup, like there's a lot of ground that has to be covered there. Like I don't think that Philip Broberg makes the St. Louis Blues an instant Stanley Cup contender.
I guess it depends on what you think of his future, right? Like he obviously didn't play a lot for Edmonton last season, was a healthy scratch through most of their playoff run, but then they inserted him into the lineup kind of late in that run, and he played pretty well, down the stretch. Now, is that just a blip, or is that like a sign that he's realizing his potential? Because I think before that he was kind of, I think in most circles, kind of viewed as like a little bit of a disappointing prospect, but. Yeah, it depends what he turns into, I guess. And this is, a bit of a speculative move on the part of the Blues. But what a brilliant move, though, by St. Louis to sign both. Like to put the Oilers in a bind on one guy is one thing, but to do it on both guys, I think that really, paints the Oilers into a corner. And to do it with, two guys that, really aren't difference makers on their team. They're prospects, they're good prospects, but they're not like guys that they absolutely can't lose.
Yeah, not blue chip. No.
Yeah, and the compensation is not what the Oilers need right now. Like the Oilers need they need two young, cheap players to insert into their lineup to fit around the rest of their roster, and that's what they thought they had in these two guys, and now poof, that's gone. You've now got two guys that are a little bit more expensive than what you thought, and they're also still maybe they take another big step forward next season and they are worth those contracts, but certainly Edmonton was hoping that they had two guys that could maybe overperform for what they were going to spend.
It wasn't long ago that we were keeping tabs of Denmark at the Olympics because Canucks had contributions there, but those days are now behind us. Although I saw that all the National Hockey League Danish players are on board in the Olympic qualifying tournament. There is a Canuck tie to to Latvia, though. And are they able to do the same, do you think, and get all of the NHL caliber talent together to try to qualify for the Olympic hockey tournament?
Yeah, guys, this was not on my radar until like yesterday. But I'm going through a bit of Olympic withdrawal, so why not look ahead to the men's ice hockey Olympic qualifiers for 2026? They're going to be going on in 3 different countries at the end of this month. One of the qualifying tournaments is in Riga, Latvia, and I scoured the Latvian news, guys. I got the Google Translate out.
Good for you.
And because they haven't announced the rosters, but Artur Silovs is playing for Latvia. He spoke in an interview out of Latvia confirming this. Teddy Bluger, it sounds like he's also playing. We read somewhere that all of the Latvian NHL players are going to participate in this tournament, so that would include Bluger, presumably. So this is I kind of wish they'd throw this on television, like TSN or Sportsnet should get behind this. Like, would you guys watch Latvia versus Slovenia, or they're going up against France, Slovenia, and Ukraine? Like, imagine that crowd in Riga.
I watched about 5 minutes of the Holinka Gretzky, and that was, again, different levels, but
nothing on the line.
Well, don't tell that to the kid. I just couldn't. Mid-August, I just couldn't get there. So I don't know if I mean,
Labor Day? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a demarcation point there when the calendar flips to Labor. But what does this do for the grand plans of all the Canucks coming back to town early to get ready for the new season?
Well, I mean, you still can come back early. This is a tournament that's going to go from August 21st to September 1st, right? There's 4 teams, so it's not a really long, drawn out tournament. So
and only the winner there gets through, right? Only the winner.
That's right. Just the winner goes through on that one. So it's I think it's really interesting. Like I have no time for the World Juniors Showcase. Canada's practice lines in like early August. I like just let the kids have their summer. Like that's kind of my view on that. But a trip to the Olympics on the line, I think, makes it really interesting. And having international hockey with like pro level players, I would watch that.
Makes for a longer season for those 2 players, but I mean, neither one of those 2 players should be overly taxed this year. So maybe it's just a great way for them to launch into the season and make sure they are ready to roll come training camp a couple of weeks after that tournament concludes. Rob, pleasure as always. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Great stuff. Thanks.